We're going to talk about how we farm because it has a huge impact on the environment, whether it's soil degradation from growing crops or the emissions from flying produce around the world. So the future of farming and the food we eat is a big issue. And Daze, the government's announced today that farmers will be paid to look after England's soil, which is an important carbon store, of course. How important a moment is that? Is this a big step to making farming more sustainable?
I think it's a vital step. I don't think it's a big step. And I don't think it's big enough for the same government that calls themselves climate leaders every 2 seconds. I see that giving and empowering farmers to be able to farm their own land and to make sure it's regenerative in purpose is so important. But soil degradation definitely is important, but it's only one part of the farming system that has to change. We have to start looking away from monocultural farming that's causing issues within biodiversity and the soil in itself. We have to start looking at how do we build regeneration and into our farming systems. And that's really important, not just for the farmers and our environment, but also for the food we eat, for the nourishment we get. These are all things that will be greatly affected if we don't change the way that we farm.
Well, yes, and it's such a complex issue, isn't it, David? We can only touch on some of the issues, but not only has farming got a role to play in helping mitigate against climate change, protecting the soil being an example, but farming is also affected hugely by climate change, certainly in some parts of the world.
Yeah, I think most scientists believe that through direct temperature effects, most crops will see declines in their yields over the next few decades. You also have to deal with the fact that climate change is making pest infestation more common. It's making weather patterns more erratic, both in the case of droughts and heat waves, but also in the case of flooding, all of which can be devastating for crops. Last year in the U.S., American farmers made more money from insurance payouts than they did from actually selling their crops to the market. And when you think globally and how interconnected we are, how globalized our food system is, it's not really the case that for most parts of the world, a crop failure in one corner of the planet doesn't mean anything. It affects everything, even if it's not directly affecting the amount of food that we'll be having in a place like the U.S. or the U.K. It will affect food prices, which are going to be that is a difficult problem for those who are already living on the edge of hardship with food or who have a hard time getting the food they need. As we've seen with so many other products over the last few months, the global supply chain is really fragile. The food supply chain is as fragile, and climate change is going to make it much harder to move that food around the world.
Sorry to cut in. I just want to give Daze one more answer on the issue of imported food. 80% of food in the UK is imported. I mean, that's going to have an impact in terms of air miles, but also some farms in other countries might have lower environmental standards. There are so many issues here, Daze, aren't there?
Exactly. And I think we have to remember, especially as an island, we are so vulnerable to the changes within food systems and the way imports come in. And I think we noticed that with COVID. So if we don't have the right soil, if we don't have the right processes to grow food at home as well, in order to meet the demands, what happens if there is another shortage? Where does that leave us? Where does that leave the average person? Where does that leave the people who are most vulnerable in society?
OK.